Season 4 of The Boys has come to a close, so that means it's time to stop and rank all 6 seasons in The Boys verse from the worst to the best. Hi, my name is Sean, and I love to talk about movies and TV way too much. With that in mind, go ahead and join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking of all the seasons of The Boys. My list isn't the right list, it's just my list, and I would love to see yours. And let's get started. In last place, Diabolical. Now, the inherent nature of an anthology series like this is that you will almost certainly enjoy certain episodes a lot more than others. And essentially, that was my experience with Diabolical. The first couple of standalone shorts, I was like, oh, that was a lot of fun. Like, wild, crazy, fit in the world. Taking the idea of if these superpowers existed, if Compound V existed, what are the other scenarios that could play out that don't necessarily require a plot in a season of the official seasons, but could be a little short. And we got some of these, and they were wild, crazy, and fun. And then there were 6 more episodes, and I thought to myself, I don't think I need 6 more of these. I get the idea, the shock value of ultra-violence and hypersexuality. I get what you're going for here. And then we got kind of like an episode about a little anecdote with Butcher. You go, okay, gotcha. Yeah, that was kind of fun. Filled in some gaps, a little bit more time with one of our favorite characters before he was working with the lineup in the main series. Cool. We see Homelander on his first mission. Cool. Filled in some spots in the lore. And then we also get an episode about a girl that can control poop. And my interest level in first adventure with Homelander versus girl that control poop, a lot more interested in one of these than the other. So by the time I got to the last few episodes, it was like, all right, I want to finish. I have to finish. I'm not super interested in actually watching all of these because the quality control here is all over the place. And even the little cold open cards with the dog, immediately you get the joke. The dog's licking its balls. The dog is farting. The dog is chewing on a bone of a human. This is not like super witty, clever stuff. It's just like in your face, shock value, we're doing it. And that's what kind of the show is. That occasionally the novelty of it is fun at the start and it wears off pretty quickly. So I did have a lot of fun with about half of the season, and I was really exhausted with the back half of the season or the later episodes. In 5th place, Season 4. For me, this was a very frustrating season of The Boys because when it was good, it was just as good as ever. When we got to the V'd up animals, I was like, yes, this is The Boys. The sequence where Homelander confronts the lab workers that did all the experiments on him when he was young, horrifying, incredible performance, shocking, funny, all the stuff that you want from The Boys. The A-Train redemption arc, like, felt earned. It felt like they took their time doing it, and so it was satisfying. And then in the final episode where we got the political conspiracy theory actually unfolding, you felt the urgency, the danger, and the show kind of come alive. But for too much of the season, it just felt like we were meandering through way too many subplots, where we have all the returning characters, plus we're throwing in a bunch of new characters, and everybody has a subplot, and most of them aren't very interesting. Every time it cut to Frenchie, I just was like, get to anything else besides this terrible Frenchie subplot. Anytime it cut to Ryan, I've never really cared for any of the Ryan stuff, so I was once again like, let's cut to anything besides Frenchie. And so just way too many subplots that weren't interesting enough, and the main plot line about the conspiracy, which actually gave urgency, stakes, danger, didn't kick in to real full gear until far too late into the season. Beyond that, the choices they made with Heyward were absolutely baffling, where I felt they were manipulative with the stuff with his mom and his dad, and then they follow that immediately with an episode where he's being sexually abused in a sex dungeon, and then at the end of the season, he's being tricked into having sex with someone that he thinks is someone else. Like, if you stop and think about any of this, it's really not good. That plays into a bigger problem with part of the season, is that obviously The Boys has always been about going extreme, shocking, and at a certain point in time, when you're just trying to shock people and keep amping up the stakes and the grossness of everything that you're doing, it stops being clever, the novelty disappears, and you're just being gross. And that's what a lot of the stuff was in this season with the human centipede, the sex dungeon, and so much more. It was just like, this is gross. It's not shocking anymore. And the final one that just kind of hurt this season a good bit was the political commentary is now so on the nose that it's just turning into references. When it's January 6th and Congress is meeting to tally votes on the new president and there's riots taking place in the streets, that's not satire. That's just a reference, and that's what this season felt like. The early seasons felt like outsiders, obviously liberal, obviously progressive, but calling out people in power wherever they landed. This season feels like insiders just referencing and calling out the other side. And so it's missing commentary because it's just referencing stuff in a way that sometimes doesn't even fit with the world of The Boys or the real world. So when it did certain things, it was just as good as ever, but far too often, it just felt like they were trying to force things, trying to be too edgy, and had way too much going on for it to be a satisfying season. Number 4, season 2, a good second season that maybe lacked a little bit of the fun of the first season, where because of where the first season ended, the twists, turns, reveals, and what The Boys did, it sets up a second season where the boys are on the run, they're in hiding, they've been framed for murder, and it creates a scenario where it just limits what they can do, and they're all on the defensive throughout the runtime of this entire season. And it just takes too many options off the table for the storytelling. Now, I mean, you want to change up the dynamics, you want to have stakes, you want to have urgency, and they kind of did that with this season, but I didn't think they found the right mechanisms in there to quite keep the energy up. Stormfront, for the most part, I thought was a fun villain where you're having someone that's very online savvy and into meme culture and knows how to manipulate the public. And that was a nice addition into the show that later seasons kind of ran with that even more so with other characters. But I think introducing it here just felt like the good version of satire in this show. And, fully playing around as a Nazi and everything like that, I think it had some merits for where they were going with the show. I didn't like all the her and Homelander stuff. I didn't care all that much about, but I think for the most part, played out nicely and led to a nice showdown in the finale. I've never cared for the Ryan plotline. And so a whole season of Butcher trying to get to his wife, who is at this house compound, co-parenting with Homelander while Homelander's throwing a kid off the roof. I've never really cared for any of it. I've always found it to just be a little bit off, as well as off-putting, to have a plotline about a child in this kind of nature. I just don't think it works. I don't like to really pick on child actors, but thus far, he hasn't done anything particularly compelling, had an emotional sequence, super charismatic. And so he's just always kind of been a little bit of a flat character to me in a context where I don't really care for it. So there's still a lot in here that I enjoyed, that it's enjoyable. Stormfront in particular, I think, was a strong villain for the season. But it just lacked some of the, like I said, just keeps it fun, the energy of the first season and some of the other seasons. In third, Gen V. And I thought this was a surprisingly effective spinoff. I wasn't particularly excited to watch it. The trailers didn't do anything to make it all that interesting. But very quickly, once I started watching it, you see how they're able to turn the formula on its head. Whereas in the main show, The Boys, we're following a series of people that don't have powers that are working against this conspiracy to prop up the superheroes, and so the boys are trying to tear the superheroes down. So it flips the formula, where now we're following a group of superpowered college students that, for the most part, are well-intentioned. They have their own flaws, but they're well-intentioned, and they discover this formula or conspiracy of people trying to develop this disease that kills soups. And the way that it ties in with the boys in seeing two different perspectives on the same virus, I think is really effective and really well done, where this virus is the weapon that Butcher's going to try and use in The Boys season 4. But in this show, it's the threat that's trying to kill the people that we care about on the show. That's a spin-off done in an interesting way that helps you see this world from a different perspective, and in a way that doesn't just tear down the boys, and it doesn't just prop these characters up. It shows the moral ambiguity and the complexity of everything that we're watching here that ties perfectly into what The Boys has always been about. There's also some nice uses of superpowers as a metaphor for trauma, and like exploring this idea of how having incredible powers also comes with a price to it, a cost to it, and making it very grounded and human while being in this context where everything is exaggerated, extreme, ridiculous, but still finding that humanity in it by showing the trauma of these college students and everything that they're dealing with and struggling through. Now, I don't find any of the characters here nearly as compelling as the characters in the main show, The Boys. That's just a fantastic set of characters. In Gen V, it's like, okay, I find the story and the context interesting, but like, I struggle to remember any of the names of the characters here. And the one that might be the most fascinating, played by Patrick Schwarzenegger, is the one they kill off in the first episode. It's like, you killed off like your most interesting guy. What are you doing here? But like I said, this is a spinoff done right that actually complements the main show, fleshes out the world, gives complexity to everything, and tells stories that fit in that world, but that you couldn't tell in the main show. So I don't think it's as strong as the best seasons of The Boys, but it is one of the stronger seasons in The Boys universe. Our runner-up, season 3. Thought this was a nice return to form after season 2 lost a little bit of the energy. I still thought it was good, but this was a nice return to form where they found some really solid season and character dynamics that just kept the whole thing interesting, where after a series of events, Homelander just feels more and more free to publicly be himself and more combative, which leads to a scenario where Huey and Butcher get more and more desperate to stop him. The introduction to the temporary compound V that gives you powers for just a limited period of time changes the formula just enough to where it makes things interesting, where our protagonists more and more compromising their values, more and more becoming like the people that they are trying to stop. And that, for me, gave an urgency, a tension, and it made it all more interesting. It gave conflict inside of the boys that had a different vibe to it than we'd had in the previous 2 seasons. And we take Huey, kind of the purest of our boys, and you make him the most compromised he has been thus far in the show. Also, you start this multi-season long redemptive arc for A-Train, where it doesn't really start out initially as an obvious redemptive arc. It starts as him still trying to be the celebrity, still pandering to people, but in the process, his efforts to pander start to unravel him a little bit. He starts to see what he's turned into, that opens the door for the redemptive arc, opens the door for the introspection. You get some insight into Homelander's background in a way that makes him more vulnerable. And he's still a monster that needs to be destroyed, but he's a monster that you see and you go, I get where this came from. I see what's kind of going on here, how he turned into this crazy thing. And Soldier Boy's just a fun spin on things, where through his character and backstory, we're able to see flashes to the world of the Soups and the Seven back in the 1980s, glimpses throughout the decade with Soldier Boy, which just have some fun parodies of decades past, but he's also just this really jacked up version of Captain America that's fun to see Jensen Ackles playing something like that in here, and seeing someone that somehow makes Homelander seem not all that bad after all. I do feel in this season, the edginess started to feel a little bit more like something they were trying to force as opposed to coming more naturally. So when you're just trying to outdo yourselves, you start doing more and more things that just seem desperate to be shocking, in which case the novelty's worn off. I felt that this is where that started for me, is to feel it in this season. But overall, a very solid season that delivered the stuff that I enjoy from the boys, that had this nice lingering sense of doom and danger, plenty of laughs, plenty of awesome action, and great character moments. But coming in at number 1, the original season 1. I tend to enjoy initial stories in worlds like this, where we're following a character, or really in the case of this show, 2 different characters on that initial exploration of the world as everything is turned upside down for them. In the case of Annie, she joins the Seven, she gets everything she's always wanted, and only to discover it is not at all what she thought it was. Or in the case of Huey, normal guy that gets pulled into this world of vigilantism against the supers after something horrible happens and his whole world is turned upside down. That, to me, that initial exploration and finding everything out, introducing the characters, tends to be some of the most compelling stuff for me. And I think in the case of the boys, so many of the plot lines that they continue to run all the way through season 4 started in season 1. And some of them, I think, have been dragged out a little bit too long, or when they've introduced new ideas, they've taken too long for the plotline to really get going. And so this is the season that I think moved the best. It was the freshest, the most original. It's darkly funny. It was still shockingly irreverent. And I think it's also a season of television that came out at the exact right moment. The Boys comic book came out 13 years before the season debuted. I first had a friend tell me about it, I believe in 2008. I was like, what? It's like the Justice League, but the superheroes are doing what to people? But the show came out at probably the exact perfect moment, which was just a couple of months after Endgame came out, which will probably go down in history as the peak of the comic book movie genre. The biggest moment it will ever have, or at least will ever have for a very long time. And a couple months later, you get this TV show come out that is kind of this, let's flip the whole thing on its head, let's deconstruct it, let's play this out in this darkly satirical way. And it was the perfect counterbalance to something like Endgame. In its initial seasons, the creators just felt like these outsiders calling out anything and everyone in power in absolutely brutal takedown fashion. And it still managed to be pretty effective and poignant at times, where it could have these very personal moments about characters forming deep connections, being hurt deeply in this insane world of ultra-violence, hypersexuality, and intense, brutal satire. And so for me, the first season was the one that did everything the most effective. That first story is what worked the best. And I think almost to some extent, they got themselves a little bit stuck because some of these characters are so good, they just had to stick around. Like Homelander's so good, he has to stick around. But at a certain point in time, it's like, are we really still on Let's Kill Homelander? 4 seasons in, we're still trying to kill Homelander and take him out and failing at it. And so it just gets a little bit repetitious because some of these things were so good that you can't get rid of them because you'd break what's working. So for me, this is the show at its peak where it did its best. One episode that I think was a misstep in here was the Believe Expo episode, where the writers have Annie go on stage and say what they're thinking and start lecturing the audience rather than the satire that they use for the rest of the show. And anytime you have a character literally giving a speech, saying what the writers want the audience to hear, you're preaching at the audience quite literally in this episode. So I think that was a misstep. Otherwise, easily the best season of the show for me, so it comes in at number 1. Be sure to join me down below in the comment section. Share your ranking down there. Also, check out my other content on The Boys. I'll have a pinned comment down below with my reviews for the different seasons. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.